and just being there, being at the wall, going through the entire Shabbat prayer service with them. There's a dancing, there's singing as part of this. And it's you very quickly realize they're not singing and dancing because they're ignoring what's happening. They're singing and dancing because they believe in God and trust Him. And the whole prayer service is the reminding of themselves every single week that God is here. He is present with us. He has not abandoned us. Welcome to the Dr. Jeff Show podcast. This show is available on Edify, Spotify, Google, Apple, or wherever you get your podcasts. Please leave a review if you get your podcast from any of those places, because that helps more people find out about the show. And we want that because this is the show where I interview major thought leaders from many fields of influence to show how our worldview changes everything. This show is going to be a little bit different. You're kind of getting used to this by now, like, oh, you might show us a speech or something else. Now, this one's a little different. My friend Megan is going to be here to interview me about my recent trip to Israel and the things I learned. We're going to talk about all aspects of it, from the October 7th terrorist attacks from Hamas. And then we're going to actually, in another episode, we're going to get into some of the nitty-gritty details. Is this a just war from Israel? How does this fit into Scripture? And all of those kinds of big questions. So welcome to the show.
Dr. Jeff, I'm glad to be with you today on this side of the table. Interesting. We're here to talk about some really important, pretty heavy stuff. As a homeschool mom, like that's the season I'm in right now. We're getting ready to study World War II and all that comes with that, the Great Depression, different things. But as I was preparing for this interview, I thought, those things happened in the past and we can learn from them in retrospect. Hopefully we're learning from them. Yet we have something right here that you stepped into the middle of.
Yes.
So a few weeks ago, you were in Israel. I'm wondering what brought that on? What were you thinking about when you decided, I need to go to Israel right now in the middle of a war zone? Let me know.
I know that it sounds crazy as we talk about it. Mm-hmm. Why would I intentionally go to a war zone in a time of war? Because it's genuinely dangerous to be there. And a lot of that, Megan, goes back to a time a little over a year ago where Stephanie and I had the opportunity to go on a tour of Israel. I had been before, but Stephanie had never been. So it was fun to go and see everything through her eyes. And it's a very powerful thing. I really recommend it, not during a time of war, not this kind of a war. Israel's always vulnerable to attack for reasons that we'll probably get into. But the opportunity arose to go back with a group of leaders who were concerned about Israel and Palestine and everything that is happening there. And we'll get into why people are so concerned about this, everywhere in the world. But they asked, would you like to go? It isn't a time of war, and we can be there to express solidarity with our friends from Israel we've met on these various tours, that we can meet with hostage families whose children or brothers or sisters are still captive by Hamas in Gaza. We can meet with survivors. So we can meet with military officials, all of these different people. And I really felt like this is important. And why for Summit Ministries, I guess, was, a bigger question in my mind. Is this worth the time and the money that it's going to take to actually do this? Back in November, I had written an op-ed about this rising generation, Gen Z, feeling like they knew that Hamas is a terrorist group. They knew that Hamas targets innocent men, women, and children. And yet, virtually all of them who said they knew that said they thought it was justified what Hamas did in Israel. I was very distressed by that. When you said in your homeschool that you're studying World War II, really the rise of World War II goes back way before the United States got involved.
Yes.
When Adolf Hitler rose to power in Nazi Germany. And one of his core goals that he had written about ever since he had spoken about anything publicly was the Jews as a race, as a people, needed to be eliminated. The Holocaust arose out of that. Out of that rose the nation state of Israel. And Israel's now in this war with this terrorist group called Hamas that rules this small part of the land called Gaza. And even though it's a war zone, I felt like I needed to be there on the ground to understand it so I could help my students understand in the course of history. How do you understand things like what the Bible says and its prophecy? How do you understand just war? How do you understand what it means to not be anti-Jewish, and still stand for justice and all of those sorts of things? And I just knew, I just had a strong intuition, which I believe is the Holy Spirit, saying, I can't explain to you I'm not going to explain to you exactly right now why you need to do this, but you need to do this. So this very strong sense that I needed to do it, and just booked the tickets and made the plans to go.
Yeah. Often that compulsion comes and we don't question. We say, okay, it was an act of obedience then.
It feels like it's most of my life as president of Summit Ministries.
Yeah.
I don't know I just have this sense that this is what God is leading us to do. And, I don't want to be bouncing all over the place like a pinball, but for me to understand something in order to teach truth well, I have to talk to people. I have to be there. I have to be in the experience. I have to have immersed myself in a place that's tough, whether it's a university campus or someplace like Israel.
And that gives us a much better picture of what's going on, because the young people that we work with are getting their news from a number of different sources, namely social media or their friends or different things. So, we'll get into what happened, but let's start one step at a time. So even thinking about making plans for the trip, you said you went with a group, so I'm imagining travel that made sense. There were plans for you to get you there, but packing for this trip, and then the plane ride, thoughts going through your mind. Take us there a little bit as you're getting ready to enter Israel.
Well, at first, it felt just like planning a regular trip.
Sure.
There are fewer airlines going, so you have to be super picky about how you get there. Arriving at certain times, leaving at certain times. The price, super high. It's just, all of those things were going through my mind. I didn't really realize the enormity of what I was getting into until I arrived at the John F. Kennedy Airport in New York to get ready to take my El Al flight. That's the Israeli national airline. And a couple of things happened. First of all, they hadn't brought the airplane to the gate. It was sitting out in the field or out in the concrete, the tarmac, surrounded by guards. They didn't even want employees from the airport getting on the airplane ahead of time. And then they started asking security questions. Everybody has to go through a security check.
Sure.
So why are you going to Israel? Seems like a really simple question. I said, I'm going with a group that I've toured with before. And she said, is this your only bag? You didn't check any bags? Nope, this is it. This is the one I've got. She said, come with me. I had to go into another room. They took everything apart. My entire bag, went through everything. And I thought, wow, this is not your normal trip.
No.
This is very serious. And I was questioned a number of times, why? Don't you know that we're in a war? Why are you going? Now, there are a lot of people on the trip who were very obviously Jewish. They were Hasidic Jews. They were dressed in what would have been the tuxedos of the day back in where they came from in Europe, and following certain prescriptions and procedures outlined in the Torah. They were dressed in certain ways, and so they were going for a pilgrimage, and that wasn't questioned. But it was people like me. Why would you be going? So anyway, finally got on the airplane, got to Tel Aviv, and I thought, I know when I approach passport control what I'm going to say this time.
Had a little time to plan it out.
Had a little time to plan. I said, so they asked me, why are you coming to Israel? And I said, I'm coming on a solidarity mission. And it's interesting, the passport agent just looked at me, looked at the passport. Have you been here before? Yes, I came in December of 2022. And I said, I came before too, once a long time ago. I said, I think it was 2009. And she looked at me and said, it was 2008.
Okay.
Oh, okay. So why are you here again? I'm on a solidarity mission. And she stamped my passport, just pushed it back to me and said, solidarity with whom?
Wow.
Never even waited for an answer to the question. And I realized the tension was present through all the people who were there. Tel Aviv airport was empty. I've never seen that before. They get 2 million pilgrims coming to Israel every year. Mm-hmm. So it's usually packed, not a person there. I met my friends there, arranged a ride to Jerusalem, and the streets of Jerusalem were unusually quiet. And it just started to occur to me that being here, even though it's still far from the war zone at that point, being here was different. That this something world shaping is happening right here.
Yeah. Well, take us through those days that followed. Take us through the trip itself. What happened next? So day one, you got there. You're driving through what seems like almost a ghost town in comparison to your past experiences. Now, what was the first item on the agenda for the group?
Well, we arrived in the afternoon. Mm-hmm. That evening, we met for dinner and had dinner with and a briefing from Itamar Ben David, who is a tour guide, but he's also, he helps with the intelligence efforts in the nation. And he does that because he speaks fluently Hebrew, Arabic, and English.
Wow.
And so his job is to look at the social media posts coming out from Hamas members, translate them into Hebrew and English so it can be understood what these people are actually thinking and saying. It was shocking to me for a couple of reasons. One of them was just realizing that this Hamas group says everything. They aren't hiding any information at all. If they slaughter people, they go on social media and brag about it. Mm. If they round up that while we were, I think it was while we were there, they rounded up 28 people they suspected of conspiring with Israel against Hamas, and they executed them. And they went on social media and bragged about it. The Hamas leaders were going on Arabic television, lots of different stations, each nation has their own station, and of course Al Jazeera, which everybody knows about, which comes out of Qatar. And they say, this is what we're trying to do. This is our aim. This is why we're doing it. We want the elimination of the state of Israel. So the meeting began with this intelligence officer asking us, can I pray for you? And we're like, we're here to pray for you. Yeah. And he recited a prayer from the Old Testament, the Aaronic blessing. May the Lord bless you and keep you. And he was saying this in Hebrew. Make his face shine upon you and extend his grace to you and give you peace. And as he was praying it, his lip was quivering. Mm-hmm. And I realized the whole world sees this as a geopolitical issue. But he understands what it really is. It's a theopolitical issue. At stake is actually whether or not people will stand in with a biblical worldview or stand against God. And Israel seems to be at the center of that question.
Wow.
So we got a little bit of rest that night. These were long days. I think my shortest day was 18 hours. Some of them were longer. So we had a lot to do, a lot of people to talk to. The very next day, we got in a bus. We started driving south and west from Jerusalem. And all of a sudden, we got to a place on the road where the asphalt was all chewed up. Why? What's going on? Well, this is where the tanks came through on these roads to try to respond to the threat. We saw places where there had been bombings and cars that had been burnt by Hamas. And we pulled into a little kibbutz. So a kibbutz is it's like a tiny little community, usually farming or somehow agricultural in its orientation. People will live there. They all work for the company that the kibbutz operates. A lot of them were started as socialist communes actually, which is very odd. Nothing like this exists anyplace else that I've been in the world. And now they're usually operated as sort of like small businesses. But people live there. They have their homes there. They have a little school. They have a cafeteria. They have recreation centers. And we pulled in, and immediately we were in a place that had been specifically targeted and attacked by Hamas on October 7th, 2023. And we knew that we were in a tough spot when the first thing, when we got off the bus, they did was issue us body armor and Kevlar helmets.
Okay.
And we could see from where we were smoke arising from Gaza, from Israeli strikes. We could smell the smoke. We knew that we were literally 1 mile from where the war was taking place.
Happening at
that time. And then just walking through the streets, paths almost, and seeing these little homes that had been burned out. And there were red markings on all of the walls. And the markings were when the building was cleared. They just spray painted it on. You might have seen something like that, in a flood or something. And then there would be a red circle with a dot in the middle that indicated whether a body was found inside that building. These little homes. And virtually every home had one of those red circles and a dot on it. And we realized this is where people were killed by terrorists right here in this otherwise peaceful little community.
Village, basically. Now, when you were there, were people still living there? Families there in that village or no?
The whole part of the country had been evacuated of citizens.
See. Makes sense.
So most of them were living in other places. There's another kibbutz that we visited in northern Israel. Now you got to keep in mind how tiny all of this is. I mean, you can drive from one end of Israel to another in just a matter of hours. From east to west in maybe an hour. It's tiny. 9 million people live there, but most of them live somewhere between Jerusalem and Tel Aviv. So this area is really agricultural.
Yeah.
Think going across Kansas, right? That's sort of what it's like there. But the people have been evacuated. So the people who were there that day, we were the only group of civilians there. There were military groups there, big military presence there now. But our guide was a person who was a leader in that community, who came back for that day to talk to us about what had happened.
And so visiting these places on your tour, after that, where did you go? Who did you meet while you were there that I'm sure every face stood out, just like the man who prayed at the beginning? I'm thinking of, the meals that you shared, the dinners you had. Who did you meet? Who did you talk to?
Well, we went from this Kfar Aza kibbutz to a town called Sderot. And it is, again, about a mile from the Gaza border. And some of this is really hard to talk about. We went to the police station. It was all brand new because their previous police station had been targeted by the Hamas terrorists. They slaughtered 20 police officers and civilians from the community, including 15 elderly people who were on a bus. And in this new police station, we went into their control center, and they showed us video footage from the attack on their community, video footage from CCTV cameras. You can't unsee what is in a lot of those videos. And I saw a lot, there's a lot of blood. There's a lot of, the bodies had been removed by the time we got there, but you saw pictures of them. I think maybe the thing that affected me the most was one of the videos from Sderot where the terrorists were coming in on little white Hilux pickup trucks, just like you see all throughout the Middle East, with machine guns mounted in the back and soldiers or fighters. I wouldn't call them soldiers, I guess. They're terrorists coming into town, and a car tries to escape past them, and they shoot it and disable the car. And out of the car comes a man, and he takes a small child out of the back seats and starts running down the street, bent over, trying to shield the child, running what he thinks is away from the terrorists. And it's a traffic circle. Another terrorist truck comes around, and they shot him. And he falls to the ground. And seconds later, you see the child get up and run back down the street. I don't know what happened. I think he might have said, try to find your mom. But she's running down the street. She has her head in her hands. It's maybe a 4-year-old child. And you just kind of try to imagine what would it be? How do you even compare that to anything? Imagine, I have a friend who's from San Diego, and he said, try to imagine because again, the scale, there are 9 million people in Israel. So to try to put it in proportion to the population, he said, imagine if a group of people came over from Tijuana to San Diego and slaughtered 42,000 people in cold blood and raped the women and posted all of this to the internet, to a Braveheart soundtrack. Would we think that needs some kind of a response? Because that's what Israel was facing at that moment. Mm-hmm. And Megan, I was watching the videos. I was also watching the people in my group. We had 2 people who on the trip who were trauma therapists with us. And then I was watching the people who work in the police station, and they were completely shut down. PTSD is real.
Of course it is.
They emotionally were completely shut down. And we had a lot of our conversation after that was, is there anything we can do to help people through this trauma? I mean, how would you ever be the same after something like this? These were just citizens going about their lives. Many of them were peace activists who would go to Gaza, establish peaceful relations, bring people over for medical treatment and things like that, and they were just slaughtered. Mm-hmm. From there, we went to a couple of military bases, one called Re'im, and anybody who's watching can look up these places. The Wikipedia entries now all include a section about what happened there during the October 7th terrorist attacks. And Re'im had been lightly staffed. It was a Jewish holiday and also Shabbat. This was all very intentional, the way Hamas did this. And they attacked that base. I've got a lot of pictures, and I didn't bring them to show. But you can just kind of imagine, hopefully based on my descriptions, there were bullet holes everywhere. Mm-hmm. I mean, these were people who came in with hundreds of rounds of ammo each, and they slaughtered everybody they could find, and including on this military base. Our tour there was being led, interestingly, by a professor from Tel Aviv University who was a reservist, a major in the Israeli Defense Force, IDF reserve. I was told later, this guy, if he would be your typical college professor, kind of a progressive leftist, whatever. But he was there. And I realized, man, you can be a man of thought, but also a man of action.
Yes.
Because he was there to defend his people. And as he led us through, he was able to explain what happened. All throughout this time, throughout the entire day, we were hearing artillery. So, you've been to parades and you heard cannons go off. It's like that. But these artillery shells are, we're in the middle. They're coming over our heads into targets that have been called in by IDF forces on the ground who have identified nests of terrorists and are calling in strikes. They're very precise now. They're not just lobbing weapons in there. It's like, at this block, at this address, with this GPS coordinate, that's where we want the artillery. So those were coming over our heads. And then everywhere we went, we got a security briefing as part of this. If you're in Jerusalem, you might hear rockets. Most of them get shot down by what's called the Iron Dome system, which is kind of it's a system of missiles they go up and shoot the missiles. And they're able to, overpopulated areas, do that. But people still take cover. So if you hear the air raid sirens in Jerusalem, you have 60 seconds, for example, to take shelter. In these areas, they told us, you have 7 seconds from the time you hear the warning to take cover. That's how close you are to the enemy trying to destroy Israel.
And in any of these areas, where do people take cover? Do they have places built in now? Has this become such a norm, for lack of a better word, to where, what do families do? Where would you have run?
There are two things. One is if you're in your home, you have a safe room. So it's a special room in your home that's been built to specifications designed to actually deflect a direct rocket hit. So Hamas, this terrorist group, they shoot rockets into Israel all the time. Okay, a lot of people are like, oh yeah, I've heard of that. I saw pictures of the Iron Dome shooting them down. The sheer scale of it is unreal. Like on October 7th, I think Hamas shot, if I remember the figures correctly, 10,000 rockets. It was a full-on bombardment. So they go into the safe room. Usually the families will make the safe room their children's bedroom, so that if something happens, the parents can go to the children rather than have the children figure out what to do. And then they have steel blinds. They close them. They have a steel door. They shut it and lock it, and that's where they stay until the attack is over. On October 7th, some of those families ended up staying in those rooms for 14 hours. In Kfar Aza, there was one family, the father, they have 10-month-old babies. The father went into the safe room with the children. The mother said, I need to prepare them some food. The terrorist shot and killed her through the window of her kitchen. The father heard this. He was the medical doctor for the community, came out, and they shot and killed him. And somebody asked me, why didn't they kill the 10-month-old babies? And I think this just reveals the depravity of the attackers. They wanted the babies to cry because other people from the community, every time they came to try to rescue the babies, they killed those people as well.
Wow.
By the way, at no point did I ever feel like anybody was propagandizing us. They weren't shouting. They weren't they were just telling us factually what happened. And in some cases, in voices that were just very calm, like this is just factually what took place. And a lot of that is just they can't muster the emotions anymore. It was just too horrifying. How do you even describe it? But when we got to the military base, I asked, and a couple of other people were also asking about this in my group. It was just 10 of us. And we were asking, can we talk to anybody? What kinds of questions can we ask? And they said, you can talk to anybody you want and ask them any question you want. They're not trying to control the information. They're just wanting the truth to get out.
I see. Now, you said that during your time there, you spoke with some of the families who still had hostages who were being held by Hamas, even some of the victims. I wonder, a couple of those that I don't think any of them will ever leave your mind, but I'm wondering, tell me about a couple of those.
One of the most horrifying sites that we went to that day was the site of the Nova Music Festival. So just like kids in the United States will, go out in a field someplace and have music and dance, that's what was happening in Israel. And the terrorists happened upon this place and slaughtered 367 young people. They shot them with their rifles. They blew them up with grenades. They were told by the police there, get in your car and get out of here. And the terrorists killed them on the road and then would throw grenades into the cars to burn them. And we saw the place where all of the cars that were burned are now stored. Like they had to have a graveyard for the car. Where do you put the cars? This is all still so new. Some of them took shelter I mentioned the homes. That was one way that people take shelter. The other one is their bomb shelters all up and down the roads and in the communities, these concrete shelters. They're as common as bus stops in the United States. So if there's a rocket attack, you can go inside these and then be protected from the attack. Hamas actually took advantage of that on one of the particular roads we were on. People would crowd inside these, and then they just threw grenades in and killed them.
Unbelievable.
But you asked about the terrorists. So I'm mentioning the Nova Festival because one of the young men there was named Hirsch. He went into one of these bomb shelters. Now, they're not big. They're, not even half the size of the room that we're in right now.
Okay.
28 people were packed inside one of these. And the Hamas terrorists began throwing in grenades. And there was a young man, every time they threw in a grenade, he picked it up and threw it back out. Threw one grenade out, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 times he picked up a grenade and threw it back out. The 8th grenade, he didn't get it in time. And this young man, Hirsch, was in that shelter. His arm had been blown off by one of the grenades. But there's some video footage from a GoPro camera worn by one of the terrorists, which is one of the things I don't think the world understands. These people wanted the world to see what they were doing. They wanted the world to see how brutal they are. They wanted the world to be afraid. On these cameras, you can see Hirsch being put into a truck. At the time he's put into the truck, he's alive. So his mother, Rachel Goldberg, you probably have seen on television, she's been a spokesperson on behalf of the hostages. She wakes up every day and prays, God, thank you for reigniting my soul. And now help me as I go out and pretend to be human. And tell the story of what happened to Hirsch. Tell about who he is, what the terrorists have done to these hostages, what the hostages are going through, where they're likely being kept, and all of these different things. Rachel has met with the Pope. She's met with President Biden. She's met with 15 or 20 world leaders. Had just come back the day we were meeting with her from Davos, from the World Economic Forum, to meet with those leaders, economic leaders, to try to, major corporations in the world trying to find some way to help. So as we met with her, at the time there were 136 hostages still being held. We found out while we were there that probably 28 of them had passed away. But Rachel, I said to her, she said, I'm just a mom. I'm fighting for my son. I wake up every day and fight for my son. And I said, you're actually a mother to 136 people. And she gave me a hug and said, I don't look too bad for being a mom to 136. But I gave her a passage from Scripture. The Lord God is our strength and shield, a helper who is always present in time of trouble. Therefore, we will not be afraid, though the earth quakes and the mountains tumble into the depths of the sea. From Psalm 46. I felt so inadequate even just sharing that with her, because here's this mom who's been in this impossible situation, fighting on behalf of people who are in an impossible situation. But it was remarkable to see the level of resilience of the people we met. Yeah. And you know what I learned, Megan? There's a difference between optimism and hope. People ask, where's the hope? And I think what people here in the United States are actually asking is, why should I feel good about this? Is there anything that I can feel good about? And everybody I met there, in fact, some of them specifically put it this way. We distinguish between optimism and hope. Yes. Optimism is a good, positive feeling about something. Hope is a belief that you are called to be a part of the response. Even if you don't know if it will ever turn out right.
That's right. Hope is deeper. I think it's the philosopher Stanley Hauerwas wrote about that at one point, and he talked about hope being something that doesn't run out the way optimism does. It is anchored, and people of hope get creative and simply find another way, such as you've described with Rachel. Now, we are going to talk more about some of the questions, I'm sure, because it's so confusing, to be honest, with the different news that we're getting here in the States about what is happening. The popular narrative right now is nothing short of confusing for those who are trying to pay attention and not sure what to do with what they're getting. So we'll talk about that. But I want to talk for a minute about that hope, because while you were there during a Shabbat, if I understand correctly.
Yeah.
Tell me about that day in the midst of all of this. What was Shabbat like?
Well, we arrived on a Wednesday evening. Thursday was our tour of the war zone. We ended that day by helping to host a dinner, a barbecue for some of the soldiers. These were all reservists. They got up on October 7th, heard about the attacks, got in their cars with the clothes on their back and went to their base.
And haven't been home.
And hadn't been home.
Wow.
So I sat and visited with them and talked with them and, did my best to try to encourage them. And your encouragement always feels so hollow in a situation like that. I mean, these are the people who are putting their lives on the line. Who am I to even say? But every word of encouragement was just received with such gratefulness, really.
I would think you saw them. I would
They
think that
knew
meant
they were
the
being
world.
seen. And the person who guided or who headed up our tour, organized all of the people who would present to us and so forth, said, "You're the first Christian group that we've hosted." A lot of political leaders, a lot of Jewish groups, but you're the first Christian group. And that we are seen by you gives us inspiration to go on. We came back that night. The next day was the beginning of Shabbat, which is starts Friday evening at sundown, goes all the way to Saturday evening till 1 hour after sundown. We were in Jerusalem. So I went with a couple of friends and one of my guides down to the Western Wall. And while you're there, if you ever have a chance to go, it's one of the most remarkable experiences. The men and women worship separately. But, so I was the men's side, which is just packed with people. And you can imagine exactly what they looked like because you've seen pictures of what, the different Jewish groups, how they appear in their dress. And just being there, being at the wall, going through the entire Shabbat prayer service with them. There's a dancing, there's singing as part of this. And you very quickly realize they're not singing and dancing because they're ignoring what's happening. They're singing and dancing because they believe in God and trust Him. And the whole prayer service is the reminding of themselves every single week that God is here. He is present with us. He has not abandoned us. After the prayer service, we went to the home of a woman named Rena Quint, this elderly lady who, as a child, had been a prisoner in one of the concentration camps in World War II called Bergen-Belsen. Sharing her experience, but sharing the Shabbat meal. And you got to keep in mind, our group, leaders from different areas, lots of different viewpoints, with Jewish friends, lots of different viewpoints, political, social, all these different things. I mean, it's mixed up there. In America, we have 2 political parties. Plus, we have 10 other little political parties.
Right.
Most people would be hard-pressed to name even 2 or 3 of them because they never win any seats or they're just tiny, tiny little parties. There are 55 political parties in Israel.
Goodness.
15 of them have seats in the Knesset, which is their parliament. The majority party in the Knesset only has 32 out of 120 seats.
Okay.
So there's no majority there like there is in the United States. It's very fractured. Even the hostage groups we met with, this one said this is the solution. This one said this is the solution. They can't all be right. And yet in the middle of all of that, a friend of mine put it this way. She said, they have a we that I have not experienced in the United States. To me, that gets back to the question you asked about hope.
Yes.
People who are older viewers will remember the 9/11 terrorist attacks in the United States. And maybe you remember what it was like to realize America is under attack even though we have major disagreements, we come together around this. And that is the sense that I got the entire time I was there. Even as people were coming, to give a little presentation to us, or we're meeting with them, and their solutions are very different for what ought to happen.
I think
the idea that Israel is just some kind of a white settler colonial power is just, it's so far removed from the truth that you only see it when you're there. I mean, Israel is a nation of people who've immigrated from 103 different countries who speak 82 languages.
the dispersion, yes.
Yes.
Amazing. I think that for this segment of our discussion, that is a place to pause, because what you have is the Shabbat. And in the midst of this, we have people who are preparing for this day out of obedience, and yet to remember. It fills their hearts, their selves with hope in something that is much bigger than here and now. And it doesn't make everything that's happening okay, because it's not okay over there. It's horrific, given what we've talked about. And yet to gather around a table, to remember with one another, and to push the dark back for a bit to keep on going. What a remarkable picture.
It is so much more than just going to a church service. I don't know how to describe it. It is the sharing of a meal and then the reciting of prayers that put God at the center. It's not that he's somehow got out of the center and we got to figure out how to get him back.
No.
It's that we're recognizing he is at the center and always was.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, we'll pick this back up and keep talking. Thank you so much for sharing these incredibly hard things. Yes.
Yeah. Thank you for watching this episode of the Dr. Jeff Show podcast. Dr. Jeff Show is a production of Summit Ministries. And if there are resources that you need on every aspect of a biblical worldview, go to summit.org. It's especially important at this time of the year to think about the 11-day Summit Ministries program. It is transformative in the lives of 16 to 22-year-olds. Those seats are filling up quickly. So please make sure you take the opportunity to get the young adult you know and love registered. We don't want them to have a shakeable faith. We want them to have an unshakable faith. Thanks for joining me today. Thank you for listening to today's episode. The Dr. Jeff Show podcast is a resource of Summit Ministries. Summit equips and supports the rising generation to embrace God's truth and champion a biblical worldview. If you want more resources that can help you live out a biblical worldview as a student or reach the next generation as an educator, church leader, or parent, head over to summit.org/resources to find out about the programs, the articles, the videos, the ebooks, and more that we offer. Also, if you're looking for more great podcasts that will build your faith and inspire you, our friends at Edify have what you need. You can find more podcasts, including the Dr. Jeff Show podcast, on the Edify app. Download it at edify.app, spell EDIFI. And then you can also search for it in the Apple Store or the Google Play Store.